Hey everybody, welcome back to game two between Doug and Devin, aka DOOGLES and D12. If you notice the quote at the bottom right, all right, that's for you, Doug. So check that out. All right, so let's dive right in and get into this game. This one isn't a very long game. Devin opens with e4. We have knight f6. This is Aliekin's defense. And then we have d3. Usually the continuation here is actually e5, and it kicks the knight around. White often ends up overextending just a little bit, but that's usually how this opening's played. But anyway, we have e4, knight f6, d3, c5, knight c3, knight c6, knight f3, e5, bishop e2, d6, castles, knight g4. And this is where your quote comes into play, Doug. Going straight in for the kill, bringing the knight deeper in the position. Bishop g5 with a tempo on the queen. Close it off with f6. Bishop h4, g5, kicking the bishop back once again. All right, so this bishop is feeling the draft a little bit. Bishop g3, and then bishop e6. Right now, it would be a good time to push this pawn. It would kick this knight out, and then also give this bishop a retreat square if things get a little dicey in the future. But anyway, we have knight d5. Trying to take control of this square right here. This is a nice outpost for the knight. It comes with an attack on the f6 pawn. So if it's ever becomes undefended, right now it's defended by the knight and the queen. But if it becomes undefended, that's a nice pawn to go after. And also, if the queen were to let's say leave the defense of the c7 square, you'd have this fork right here. So Doug gets rid of the knight. So we have bishop takes d5, e takes d5, knight d4, coming deeper into the position. Knight takes d4, c takes d4, bishop takes g4, queen a5. What I hit there? Okay. Queen a5, bishop takes h5, check. There's nothing really the king can block with, so right now it looks like the one of the better squares is king d8. That's what he plays. c3, queen takes d5, going after that isolated pawn. Queen b3, queen c6, rook ac1. Now this was a good move. It looks like we're indirectly attacking the queen, so the next move, I really thought c takes d4 was coming, and with that discovered attack, but for some reason I don't know if something happened. I'm thinking maybe here we had f5, then queen f7. Maybe Devin thought that there was some kind of either check and winning the rook, or something to where she could grab a piece. But the problem is the queen and king defend this square. But like I said, this is a blitz game, both under a little bit of time pressure. And I said before, this blitz games aren't their typical time control. So it's still like really great moves considering. So we have f4. Like I mentioned earlier, this bishop has a really good chance of getting trapped because these pawns kept rolling in. f4, bishop takes f4. I mean, if you're going to lose it, you might as well take something, so good move. E takes f4, queen e8 check. And this is where a slight oversight with not realizing that Doug has the queen and king protecting this square. So queen takes e8, bishop takes e8, king takes e8, and Doug ends up winning a bishop out of the exchange. So I think that's why earlier he didn't really respond to the threat of the queen coming in, because there really wasn't a whole lot there. Rook fe1 check, king d7, rook e4 is a good move because it advances the rook, and sets up to begin stacking here. You know, if this pawn advances, this one becomes weak. This pawn right here is obviously isolated and weak. You have these doubled pawns here. All right, then we have f3. Is a good move on Doug's part, because it's looking to either bust open the position, or if this pawn advances, his pawn on f3 controls any squares his king could escape to, or excuse me, her king could escape to, which you'll see later on in the game that it actually comes in handy. So rook takes d4, just getting rid of that pawn, and now we have a nice, like I talked about in the last video. See, we have 2 pawn islands here, 3 on the king side, 4 on the queen side, whereas Doug has 3 pawn islands. Technically, these aren't really pawn islands because they're all going to be connected. I mean, this pawn could fall at any second, but it's this isolated one right here. It doesn't have a whole lot of protection. I mean, the bishop here kind of has to babysit it a little bit. But anyway, we have rook e8 taking advantage of the open file. Now that Devin took the pawn on d4, it abandoned the e file. So Doug does a good job taking advantage of the e file. And we have b4, rook e2. It's a really good move here too, coming to the second rank, because his rook is supported by the pawn. It goes after pawns on the second rank. I mean, that's a really good move. I'm assuming Doug's going to be able to get this bishop out of the way, stack rooks. This is going to come with a tempo on the rook. This pawn's weak if this rook ever moves out of the way. So his pieces are getting coordinated pretty well. Devin being down a piece, you know, Doug being up the bishop, really makes an impact in this game continuing. So we have king f1. It's a good idea. So if we have takes here, you can recapture the rook, and also just brings in another defender. So that way, if the back rank becomes weak, you can not only capture with the rook, and then if there's a secondary piece, the king can recapture. So it's a good idea to bring the king closer. G4, G3. All right, so now this position has been locked up, kind of closed. If Doug were looking to, and which I see a lot of times in his games, which is smart on his part, advance these rim pawns or flank pawns, wing pawns, whatever you want to call them, on the A and H file. You can come in and continue to bust open the position here, and then you get a rook in. If Doug were able to get his rook all the way to H1, this would be mate, because the his F3 pawn blocks the escape square, and he has his rook here blocking the E1 square. So yeah, so it looks like that's what's possibly happening, is going for a pawn breakthrough there. So we have king c6. Not really sure what king c6 was for. Maybe to support the advance of the d pawn, and then the g4 pawn hangs, so she takes advantage of it. And Doug advances his d pawn. So d5, d4, bishop d6, c4, bishop takes b4, c5, closing the position off and blocking the bishop's retreat. Rook he8, and now this is a really dangerous position. We have the rooks stacked on the e file, and remember I mentioned before, this f pawn is a monster, blocking off the g2 square. So I mean, in hindsight, maybe leaving the king on g2 and getting a pawn on h3, you know, you might have had an escape here. Then we have h3, the last try to try to save this position somehow. I really don't think there was anything else. Obviously, this rook can't interfere because of the d5 pawn protects that square. So there's really nothing she could do. We have rook e1 check, rook takes e1, rook takes e1 mate. So really good stuff on Doug's part, recognizing that he's got the bishop on b4 protecting the rook, and this pawn, just like I said before, being an absolute monster. So pretty quickly, Doug was able to capitalize on that game. It was a really good game. So game 1 is Devin's, game 2 is Doug, and thanks for watching, and look forward to game 3 coming up next.